finally beating Cuphead after 6 years. Now, it's time for me to review it after 6 years. I don't think anyone's going to watch it, but I'm still going to review it. I don't care. I really want to review it.
Hey guys, what is up? This is Matthew Davis, me once again. Welcome back to another video game review. I'm doing a video game review at my mom's house. I wanted to wait till I got home, which will be Sunday, but I just wanted to review this game as soon as possible because I finally managed to beat it. Not including the DLC, but yeah. I'm going to be reviewing Cuphead. I played this game when it first came out back in 2017 for Xbox, but I didn't get that far into it, so I waited till the Switch version came out. It was like 2018, 2019, but yeah, either way, I finally managed to beat it, so now I'm going to talk about it. And yeah, I am extremely late on reviewing the game, and there's pretty much no point when I've been reviewing so many other games, and there's so many upcoming games that I want to play, Spider-Man, obviously. But I just wanted to review this game because I actually have quite a bit to say about it. And if you're unfamiliar with Cuphead, it was one of the biggest games to come out in 2017. It's basically a 2D side-scroller filled to the brim with boss battles. This is a boss rush game with some levels mixed in, though there aren't as many levels as there are bosses. Originally, the game was supposed to be a boss rush, but they decided to wait a little bit before release and add some levels in, making it a full game. But the main gimmick through this entire thing is fighting the bosses, because the storyline goes like this. Cuphead and Mugman are two brothers that go into a casino, and they're on a winning streak when the devil decides to make a bet with them, and when Cuphead loses the bet, both him and Mugman are screwed as they have to give up their souls. But the devil is willing to make a deal with them if they can get the contracts of the previous people who were supposed to give their souls but didn't, then he'll let them go. So of course, they have to go and fight various bosses throughout the entire world, 3 worlds in total. It's not a very long game, but it's going to be way longer for most people who suck at games. Because at first glance, the game would look like it would be some kiddie game, and it's definitely a very kid-friendly game. The art style, of course, which is another really big thing about it. But, of course, it's not a game that I would say kids are going to have a fun time with. Because while this game is super fun, there's one big thing that is infamous about this game. It's difficulty. People have compared this to Dark Souls immediately when it came out because people are going to die over and over. Here's the thing about what makes this game so hard. You have 3 lives, none of which you can upgrade except for a charm that you can get, but that's pretty much it. And you have to dodge so many things while shooting away. What's really cool is that the way Cuphead and Mugman shoot is with their fingers, and they can get better weapons when they get coins from the levels and hidden coins throughout the world, giving them better range and better power and stuff like that. And you can get abilities too to improve, like your parrying system, because you're going to have to parry things. Whenever you see little pink things, then you have to parry them in order to boost up your cards, which are these things called power-ups, in which you can unleash more power. When you have all of them filled up, then you unleash a superpower. And unfortunately, you can only equip one at a time, so you're just going to have to try and mix and match the best materials to use before making it to the end. Even with the amount of abilities you get, the game still is not any easier. Despite its difficulty, what really makes this game super unique and what made a really big impact on players was, of course, its 2D cartoon art style. It looks phenomenal. It honestly looks like if an old Mickey Mouse cartoon fused in with something like Contra or Mega Man, because it pays a lot of homage to old school retro games. And unlike those games, there is no game over. You have an infinite amount of lives, so pretty much it's on you if you die, because yeah, the game might have a lot of stuff to dodge during the boss fights, but it's honestly going to be your fault because the controls are super responsive. They are super smooth, and the game never feels unfair. It's extremely challenging, but there's a lot of stuff to do in the game that is more than just shooting away at bosses. You have to time it just right. You're going to die like 20 to 50 times, but it's all going to be worth it because the bosses don't last very long. They last around like 2 to 3 minutes, but it'll still take a while for you to get to that next phase. And just when you make it to the next phase, you're probably going to die instantly because of that last move. There are times where you feel like you almost got it, but then you immediately die. And one thing about the game I should mention is that every time you die, the game will show you how long you had until making it to the end. So that's really what makes the game so motivating, because it's an extremely difficult game filled with challenge. There is also these levels where you can gain certain abilities by parrying enemies in order to save this ghost girl called Miss Chalice, who will give you power-ups, and who you can play as later on in the DLC, which I will talk about. But yeah, there are different types of levels, different types of bosses, run and gun stages, and ones where you have to fly in planes, which are probably the most irritating bosses, especially with that damn iron giant looking one. Oh, and don't get me started about the dragon one. The dragon one is probably the most infamous one. Yeah, they're probably even harder than the final boss. But despite the fact that this game is really going to annoy you with its challenge and you are going to die a lot, you're going to hate the game at first. But the more you progress, and when you do finally manage to beat that boss, you're going to love the game. It will make you love the game. It will make you go from hating it to absolutely loving it. Because the bosses, they're so unique. And they're not just reskins of other previous bosses that you fight before, but they have really unique designs and really unique movesets. Their designs are heavily inspired by 1930s style cartoons. One reminds me of Bluto from Popeye. One's going to remind you of Tom from Tom and Jerry. And a lot of these bosses are heavily inspired by those types of cartoon characters. And while there are 3 worlds, and the game will take roughly around 2 hours to beat, at least in terms of how long the game is, it's going to take probably around 10 hours if you try to get everything. And here's the thing too, there is a difficulty setting in which you can play bosses in simple mode, that way you can progress easier. But here's the catch though, yes, the game does have an easy setting for the bosses, but guess what? You can't get to the final boss unless you beat them in regular mode, because only then will you get the contract. So it's probably going to be amazing how people can simply see that there is a simple difficulty, and when they get to the final boss, they're all like, oh, why can't I get to the final boss? Well, the only way to get the contracts is by, of course, beating the game on regular difficulties. So yeah, because if you beat on regular difficulty, only then will you beat the contracts. But despite that, you can still progress through the world, even on simple difficulty. You just have to go back and beat the bosses on regular difficulty if you want to make it to the end. I guess the simple difficulty is there in terms of like a practice mode. Even some of the bosses on simple difficulty really aren't that simple. But some of the best bosses in the game are, like, the final boss I think is epic, and the one with King Dice is probably the longest one given how you have to play his little game. Yeah, but really though, the challenge in the art style, and with how great and phenomenal the music is, it's impossible to not want to try and come back. You're going to have to take long breaks after beating that one boss, but let me tell you, it is so satisfying being able to beat those certain bosses, because when you finally see that knockout screen, it really does feel like you accomplished a whole lot.
Of Star Command animated series, yeah. No, but...
Yeah, I did it! Woo! And just when I was about to be hit. Up yours, Bluto.
Yeah.
This is why you always lose Olive from Popeye.
It's just like in Dark Souls. Once you manage to beat a boss in that game, you'll feel like you have completed something epic, even though you haven't made it to the end yet. But people have said that this is probably even harder than games like Dark Souls. I mean, it's impossible, like almost impossible, to beat a boss on your very first try. Like, even in Dark Souls, I managed to beat tons of bosses on my first try. Bloodborne, which has the Orphan of Kos, which is declared by many to be the hardest boss in like the history of gaming. I beat that on my very first try. But right here, it is going to take you more than 10 tries before making it to the end, except for maybe the first few bosses. Like, the first few bosses are more like the tutorial bosses. But really, though, its art style and with how unique the game is in terms of its Contra-like style and its platforming with its glorious animation, it is just impossible not to want to get back in. It's a game that I have had so much fun with, and when I did manage to beat it, I feel like I accomplished a whole lot. But of course, it didn't stop there, as 5 years later, we got the DLC known as the Delicious Last Course, in which you can play as Miss Chalice. And the funny thing about the Delicious Last Course is that it stands for DLC, which that can't be a coincidence at all. But that was just pure genius. And the DLC is just as fun and probably even more challenging, but it adds in more bosses that are just as memorable, and they add more challenges too. Like, there are bosses where you have to parry in order to beat them, and you can't use abilities, but yeah, there are tons of different abilities to try out. Like, there's one where when you dash, you won't hit anything. There's like an invisible dash. There's one where you can boost your char. It was so much fun trying to find out which combinations work best for me. And even Miss Chalice takes up a slot in terms of your abilities. You can't, like, switch out your characters, but yeah. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention, you can also play this game cooperatively, but it might make the game easier, but it's definitely going to be a lot harder for other people because they're going to argue a whole lot. But hey, it's not like in Battletoads where you can beat each other up, making you just completely lose the game. It still provides a nifty challenge with co-op, but it's a lot more fun playing cooperatively because despite the fact that the game is called Cuphead, apparently he can't go anywhere without Mugman. One thing I will say is that while you can play solo as Mugman, he pretty much works the same. When you play as Miss Chalice, yeah, she has a double jump and she has 4 extra hit points and her own different movesets in terms of, you know, the big, massive power move. But yeah, I guess that's probably one minor thing I could say about the game. And I kind of would have liked a little bit more levels just to give it more of that, you know, full game type setting instead of it just being a boss rush. But that didn't really bother me. I mean, the bosses were far more fun than the run and gun stages, but I had a lot of fun with the run and gun stages. And what's cool is that when you get the coins and when you make it to the end, even if you don't have all the coins, you can still go back and get those other coins without having to get the coins that you got before again. It's very forgiving, even though sometimes it's not, given how grueling its difficulty is. One thing I should also mention about the DLC is that the coolest thing is that that game has its own abilities that do feel super helpful, and some even cooler weapons that you can use as well. And what's great about them is that you can use them in the main game. If you buy the DLC, which is only $8, which I think is a great deal, and the DLC is relatively short too, that's just perfect, and it honestly makes the game even better, given how you can use those abilities to progress through the main game, and you don't have to beat the main game in order to make it to the DLC. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it makes the game easier, but it makes the game a lot more forgiving and gives you more opportunities, better opportunities to progress through. And once you do beat the game, you can actually play the game on a much higher difficulty, which, yeah, I cannot imagine anyone who can beat the game on the highest difficulty, but there have been on YouTube. Also, when you do beat a boss, and once you do complete a boss, you'll get these A, B, C rankings, and if you want to complete them, you have to get the highest ranking in order to get that last achievement. And it's an absolute nightmare trying to platinum the game on PlayStation, because there is so much you have to do. There's even a way that you can unlock a mode just by not killing anyone in the levels. And while there are 6 levels total, it'll still provide a hefty challenge if you do want to get that one mode. But all that really happens is that you can change the game from color to black and white, which is cool, I guess, but you could just literally do that with a TV setting. But I don't know what that entire thing is like. It would have been better if they would just give you like a better weapon or something like that. But really though, despite its grueling and unforgiving difficulty, the game encourages you to come back for more. I know I mentioned this earlier, but it's not the type of game where if you die, you just want to give up. You're going to see the die screen over and over again. There's even an area where it'll tell you how many times you've died. And I've died like 400 times. Well, currently, I haven't beaten the DLC yet. I wanted to wait till I beat the DLC, but what really mattered is beating the main game. And it's even with the DLC, it's still a lot of fun trying to beat those just as difficult, if not even more difficult bosses. But it's a game that never feels like it's going over the top. Even when it does, it's not entirely the game to blame. Like, you really need to focus. It's not the type of game where you can just hit one button. Like, you gotta memorize the controls, you gotta memorize the patterns, and when you do, it just makes the game a whole lot more fun. Because if this game just had an easy setting, or an easy setting that allows you to get to the boss without having to get all the contracts, then yeah, it honestly wouldn't be as fun. But really, it's the type of difficult game that is just so addicting, just like the Dark Souls series. I talk about Dark Souls a lot, but it's a franchise, it's one of my favorite gaming franchises, and I've just fallen in love with that series so much that I do tend to talk about it on my channel once in a while. Some people even mention that the game is probably even harder than Dark Souls. I mean, I have a poll on my channel asking you which is harder, Dark Souls or Cuphead, and most of you chose Cuphead. And yeah, I can definitely see why. You're probably going to see the "you died" screen more times in this than you are going to be in any other Souls game, but I've been talking about this game way longer than I should. I guess I should talk about it in the end, but I'm just trying to think, like, what exactly am I missing? Because the game doesn't have a whole lot of content, but that's forgiving. It's like less than 20 bucks. It's $27 if you get the DLC, but that's what makes it all the more worth it. It's an independent game that just made it so big that so many people have been playing it. There are just people who just tend to just want to keep trying. It's a game that I kept trying with, and I did manage to beat it, and I was so satisfying that it just felt super rewarding. And with its DLC, it just adds more of that challenge. I do find it kind of weird how we had to wait 5 years for the DLC, but the point is, it's finally out, and it is just as good as the main game. And in the end, Cuphead is a terrific game, and there's a big reason it was so popular. It was one of the biggest games to come out in 2017. Well, it's not quite as on the same lines as Breath of the Wild or Persona 5 or Mario Odyssey, given how those games have more content. But since this is a game that is only 20 bucks, 27 if counting the DLC, it feels like there isn't a whole lot, but it adds so much. With its charming animation style, how it takes you back to your childhood way before the events of CGI animation, it pays a lot of tribute to that. And despite the animation baiting you into buying the game, thinking you would say something that you could just breeze through, it's a game that has a lot of challenge. And adults have played this far more than kids have. I wouldn't even go as far as to call this a kid's game, because there are times in the game where it does have stuff that you wouldn't see in modern cartoons. Specifically like alcohol references or tobacco references or smoking references or even uses of the word hell or hell itself. I mean, the bad guy of this whole thing is the devil. And the characters too, they're honestly memorable themselves. Even the NPCs like King Dice, who I think has the best song out of the entire soundtrack. It has so much. There was so much love and care put into the game that it's pretty much no wonder why it was a huge hit. And because of this, not only did we get the DLC, of course, but because the game was so popular, we even got a Netflix animated series called The Cuphead Show, which I have been watching, and it's pretty good. I don't think it quite holds a candle to the game, though, but I do think that in terms of the animation style, the animation in the game is better, but I do think it does do somewhat of a respectable job trying to make it feel like that old style, even though it still feels a bit more modern, but I do think it's a good show. The game, though, I think is phenomenal in terms of its art style, its gameplay, its challenge. All of that is amazing. And even though it's a game you're going to hate at first, once you do manage to get through the bosses that you've been stuck on, it is so satisfying. And sure, it's not like an RPG where you can gain experience. You have to just play the game by how the game wants you to play the game. but it's a game that I just feel like is just so replayable and so memorable with its art style and its music. And because the music's so good, it just really wants to make you go back into that boss. You're going to have to take long breaks, sure, definitely, because after being that one boss that you've been stuck on for like an hour. But still though, Cuphead is a game that I am always going to remember. It's a game that encourages the player to try and get better, and when players do tend to get better at the game, then it just feels so satisfying once you do manage to beat those bosses. The bosses are some of the best that I have ever played. They never feel repetitive. Despite the challenge, all of that is combined with some of the best run and gun gameplay that I have played in years. I feel like later down the line, in like 10 years, it is definitely going to hold up, and I wouldn't be surprised if it gets a sequel, and I hope it does. It's an amazing game, and you certainly do need to play it if you're a fan of really hard old school games, or if you have a lot of nostalgia for old cartoons. Either way, it's a fantastic game. Just don't play if you have anger issues. I mean, I'm not the calmest man in the world, but I was still able to get through it, and I'm glad I did. It's one of the best indie games of the century, one of the most memorable games of the 2010s, and one of the most difficult games ever made. But it's one that's honestly so hard to, even though it is kind of easy to hate when you do first play it, but I've been repeating myself so many times. I should just give you guys my score. Now, this score is just for the main game. If you add in the DLC, it honestly makes the game so much better. With the DLC, the fact you can play as a new character, and the new bosses, and the new challenges, and the new abilities that you can get, and the fact that you can use them in the main game, it makes the game all the more better. And for that, it is certainly a perfect game just for that. So yeah, if you really want that full experience, I highly recommend getting the DLC as well. But still, even if you're just focused on the main game, there's still a lot that the main game does have to offer. I can't believe I've been talking about this game for so long, and it's a really old one, but it's one that I'm just truly satisfied I was managed to beat, and I certainly did want to review it. If I did beat it back when it first came out, but I wasn't as good at games as before, then I certainly would have reviewed it, but yeah. It's one of my favorite games of 2017, and it did make it onto my list even though I didn't review it, but I love the game even more now that I beat it. So yeah, still play it. There's a lot of people that still come back and play it, and there are people who have still been playing it, and I mean, if it wasn't so popular, we wouldn't have had the Netflix series, and we wouldn't have had the DLC. I've been talking about this for way too long, so yeah, I'm just going to end it right here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Word out.